Commercials are literally everywhere these days. No longer just radio ads or TV ads, but now we've got web ads, we've got streaming ads, we've got podcasting ads. The list goes on and on and on. And there's one person who is casting all of these ads at the highest level. And if there's anyone who is equipped to help us better understand how to master the genre, it is the lady behind the library. Welcome to the show, Tina Morasco.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So 3 hot projects fresh off the presses just before we get ready to start this interview. Anything exciting that we should be looking for in our
Well,
inboxes soon?
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
Oh,
They'll show up in your inbox soon enough. Yeah, usually we're kind of ironclad until they get released to the agent population. But yeah, no, lots of good stuff. And as a matter of fact, we are having truly the busiest April I think we have ever had at Sound and Fury, which is a bold, bold statement. So, right out of the gate, just to start the interview off on such a positive note, with all of the turmoil in the world and the markets and everything that's just sort of like all of these looming threats between AI and,
yep.
what's happening in the country and the world at large, commercials are booming more than ever. We have never been busier, and the ask has never been greater for human, spontaneous, connected interaction. So there are a lot of things to breathe a temporary, or hopefully not a temporary, sigh of relief about.
That's actually really surprising to me,
Mm.
only in that, you know, it kinda looks like maybe we're heading towards recession. Obviously, we hope that doesn't happen, but it certainly looks that way. And traditionally speaking, in recession, one of the first things that companies cut is advertising and marketing budgets, right? And so to hear the exact opposite of that, actually,
It's
that probably makes sense with what's going on because everything that's happening
everything's
right now is so freaking chaotic. Nothing makes sense. So maybe that's exactly why that makes sense.
It's exactly right. It's like we're in those bizarro universe, right? Where up is down, black is white.
Yeah. Nobody knows what to do at this point. So they're just like, just buy more commercials. It'll be fine. Buy more ads.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And listen, we're totally here for it. And we've been doing our best to just embrace it. And it's just great news for voice actors right now. So hopefully it's trickling down and everybody's feeling very busy and very active, but it is certainly busy from a casting point of view.
That is really good news, and actually that kinda tracks when I think last week, I saw more auditions from my one agent
Hmm.
in a week than what
Yep.
I had probably seen in the previous month. It was like boom, 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 like just rapid fire. I was like, "What the heck is going on?" But that tracks with what you're saying right now.
Very, very, very much so. And it doesn't really seem to be like, usually April is the month where we catch our breath. So
Right.
Q1 is usually just gangbusters in casting because we're getting everything ready for the Super Bowl. And then it's like all the award show circuits. And then everything is very busy from January to March traditionally. And then April is usually like our slowdown, catch our breath. And then, things start to pick up again for summer because that's all the back to school stuff. And it's just there has not been a moment, not a single moment of we haven't had a single day where we weren't like triple booked this month. It's been
That's incredibly encouraging, and I think that's actually probably gonna make a lot of voice actors very happy to hear because, I mean, admittedly, is kind of intimidating with everything that's going on right now and wondering how that's gonna play out, and is it gonna affect the industry? If so, how is it gonna affect the industry? But look, you are just the bringer of joy because you
yeah.
actually said 2 incredible things in that opening
Yeah.
statement that I was like, "What?" Right out of the gate. The fact that everybody is doubling down on human at this point, I think,
Yeah.
is incredibly
Mhm.
encouraging as well. So let's talk a little bit about that because,
Yeah.
AI is the boogeyman, right? So let's
Yep.
address the boogeyman.
Yeah, let's address it because I think when you face your fear, if you face the boogeyman, you'll realize the boogeyman is just, the old man wizard behind the curtain that really doesn't hold the great power that we all think it is. Yeah. So as a matter of fact, like anybody who has the library or anybody who's ever coached with me knows that I scream from the rooftops to anyone who will listen that the commercials, at least that we cast, are really films, right?
Yep.
And they are cinematic, and they are longing for people to be really living truthfully through the circumstance of the film, right? And literally last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, but we got on a creative call, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I wish I was recording this for the library." And the creative director got on the line, and he literally said, "Look at me." I was like, "Okay, you got me. I'm here. I'm here."
You
And he
have
was
my attention.
yes, he's like, "What I want you to understand is that we have made a film. This is not a commercial, and every audition that we received prior to this, there were people auditioning for a commercial. This isn't a commercial." And I was like, "Sir, you have come to the right place." Like, I am literally out there, like, proselytizing this word and to anyone who will listen. What he meant was, and I don't wanna say what the product was, but just because it hasn't hit the air yet. He was like, "But this has to feel like the lived human experience of the protagonist who had really seen a lot, been through a lot." There was like they wanted that sort of like weathered, almost like world weary pain of like have seen a lot of things in
Yeah.
their life, right? And so that cannot be achieved vocally. You cannot vocally indicate your way through that kind of depth of experience, that kind of true soul connection and gravitas and all of that. And they were saying that, like, everything they heard just sounded too commercial, it sounded too pre-planned, it didn't sound authentically connected. And what he's really what it really boils down to is they want real actors. They want actors who are just living from their raw authentic experience through the moments of the film, one by one by one, without it sounding pre-planned, without it sounding read, without it sounding rehearsed in any way. And as far as I've heard, and I'm sure it's going to catch up with us soon, but any AI generated anything that I have ever heard, it is so clearly AI.
Yeah.
Like, and while you can program it to be happier, you could program it to be sarcastic, you can't program it to change on a dime. You can't program it to play the truth of your experience. You can't program it to play a relationship that you have with the person you're talking to. Those are such uniquely human characteristics and abilities that it's really keeping us safe so far. And it's very encouraging. And it's so fun to cast. It's so fun to listen to people who are really digging deep, who are really bringing their truth to these words. And it's like, one of the most creative parts of my job that I absolutely love.
The two things that I'm seeing right now, and I'd love to hear if this is what you're seeing too, but there's kind of two things that I see. One is more authoritative. They're looking
Mhm.
more for a firm read. And the other is this constant direction of the non-announcery, nothing commercially.
Well, that's yeah,
And
that's
so
it
nothing
for me.
commercially is exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So the way I define, like, because we write it at the end of every spec, to me, what that means is like something sounds commercial when you deliver the melody and the cadence of a traditional commercial without any connection to the words, the meaning of the words, to whom you are saying those words, and what your intention is as to why you're saying it. So you would just give me the melody of a
Right.
commercial, which would be like, introducing the new Toyota Camry, which I've done this example 8,000 times, but it's the quickest bang for our buck. So that even if you try to alter that and make it just sound conversational, I can do that and still have no connection to anything. I could be like, yeah, introducing the new Toyota Camry. That's still commercial because there is no depth of meaning or connection. So what we're listening for is some kind of truthful engagement, some truthful interaction. So what I would want to hear on something like that would be like you and I, like, I would craft that we were next door neighbors, and I've been talking about getting a new car for 10 years, and you're like, "Okay, T, I'll believe it when I see it." And then I roll up in it and I'm like, "Read 'em and weep, Scott." I mean, Marc, I called you by, we go by last names here. Read them and wait, Marc, I did it. Introducing the new Toyota Camry. And my connection to you, my intention, which is sort of like, haha, in your face, I did it, quite literally grounds my voice and stops it from going into the sing-songy commercial melody. And then maybe for take two, I imagine I'm seeing like a clown car of like 10 kids getting out of the back. And I'm like, oh, spacious. Introducing the new Toyota Camry, right? And then maybe for take three, I see a terrible crash. Everybody walks away safely because of the safety features, and I just drop into it. I'm like, whew, introducing the new Toyota Camry. And then you have an A, B, and C that are differentiated by intention and not melodically differentiated by your voice. And that's what we mean by not typical commercial sounding. So it has to be intention driven, which is acting. And it comes from the inside out. It comes from there is a circumstance that I am responding to, instead of I am going from the outside in, changing my voice and manipulating it to create a certain sound or a mood.
So when we don't, because sometimes commercials come with a really great
Mhm.
brief that really kind of helps you get a sense of what it is. Sometimes you get a script and a couple of descriptive words, and the script is completely nondescript
Yeah,
because there's no story in it, and
right.
without the visuals, you don't have it. So this is really about, sometimes it's just about, you've got to sit down and just
Creative.
figure out what your version of the story is and kind of
Mhm.
hope for the best. And
Right,
just
which
imagining those scenarios like you just talked about.
yeah, so that's why, like, I gave just such a like a absolute like neutral tagline, and then you create. Okay, so the first one was kind of playful. The second one is like, oh, I'm impressed, and the third one is like, oh, if there's a serious spot. So then one of those will match the tone of whatever the story is that we're not privy to. But one of those will invariably match. But really, in the casting process, what I'm listening for is like it would be a one in a million shot that you would guess the story correctly, but it doesn't really matter if it's correct. It just matters that I hear the engagement and that I hear the intention driving it, and that it's not like just that springboard,
It's
like
just,
introducing.
yeah, it's
So
making
yes,
that actual connection.
yeah,
So, I mean, maybe you just answered the question, but is that the number one thing that we're doing wrong based on countless auditions that you hear? Is it that we're trying to do it vocally or
yeah,
sonically as opposed to doing it narratively?
yeah. So one of my big things is that like voiceover right now, like take the word voice out of voice acting. It's just acting, and it cannot be voice driven. It has to be thought driven. It has to be connection driven. But I think one of the biggest mistakes that I hear actors make is that they just grab a few adjectives from those specs and then vocally slap it on their chords, right? And then ride it all the way through. So I'll give you a really good example. Without understanding the meaning of what the story is, like what the story of the film is. So we were casting for, it was a spot about climate change. And the specs were young, hip, cool Gen Z, because they're going to be the generation that's going to end up having to solve this, right?
Yep.
And Zendaya was one of the prototypes. But then the specs went on to say, because the specs that we write are very elaborate. The specs went on to say, but speaks with enough depth and understanding and credibility that we believe that this has been like their area of expertise since they were young. So if you think about like a Greta Thunberg,
Yeah.
like somebody like that, right? And so it wasn't about like sounding cool. It was just like, no, this is the generation that's going to have to tackle this problem. And we want to hear how this generation talks about this subject matter, right? But most of the people who auditioned just saw young, hip, cool Gen Z and saw Zendaya. And then they were saying words like this, Marc, I kid you not. They were saying words like, it doesn't improve our lives. It just preserves life on Earth. Air company, extinction ends here. And I'm like, you're talking about extinction of the human race. Like,
It's
and there was just
sounding pretty
no,
nonchalant about it.
yeah, exactly. Because they saw young. So they grabbed a
Yep.
few adjectives,
Yep.
right? Ignored the rest of the depth of like what version of them was really being asked for, had no idea what the meaning of the story was. So I think the biggest, just to answer your question more directly, the biggest mistake I think people make is they don't really spend enough time excavating the story in the copy. you just kind of take it for granted and like go like, oh, if I say this in a very casual conversational way, it's enough. But you
Yeah.
really have to understand what the meaning is of what you're saying, right? You had to understand in that script, the meaning of those words are, listen, we have this technology and no, it's not going to improve your life right now, but it is going to preserve life on Earth. With this technology, extinction is going to end here, right? So it's like understanding that that's the meaning of it and then going, okay, so if I was young, if I was like a Gen Zer who has spent my early part of my life dedicated to climate change, maybe I'm on a podcast talking to somebody very casually about this and I'm explaining it, very, kind of coolly because this is what I do all the time, but from a perspective of like, I am the expert on this and I live, eat, and breathe this, and I understand it really deeply. And then saying it casually from that point of view, not like putting on the sound of Gen Z.
Is this where online casting gets us? Because online casting almost forces you to rush, right? The goal is submit as many auditions as quickly as possible, because if you don't submit within the first 20 people, it's never going to get heard.
Yeah.
And so we're almost trained to not think, just go
Yeah.
in, figure it out, rip and read it, whatever. And what you're describing is the complete and total opposite of that. It's spend more time
Mhm.
reading the brief and crafting the story arc or the narrative that you feel
Yeah.
that goes with it than you actually spend in the booth recording it.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to, so what I'm suggesting doesn't really, I have really come up with a very simple four-step process. And if you just pay attention to these four steps on every single solitary piece of copy, you'll get really good and really fast at it. The four steps are basically, and I go really deep into this, but just to kind of give a cursory understanding, you know, really read the specs, even if they're basic, right?
Right.
Read the specs and ask yourself which authentic version of me most closely matches these specs. Because in commercials, everything is about authenticity. So we're no longer putting on characters or playing a role. It's just a version of us. So is it, we're all 10 different versions of us in everyday life,
Yep.
right? So is it, the casting version of me? Is it the mom version of me? Is it the best friend version of me? Which, if so, is it the empathetic best friend? Is the really funny best friend? There's always different versions of us. One of those versions will match the spec. So if it says, hey, this person speaks with authority, depth, and gravitas, I don't want anybody putting on the sound of that. It's just like, this is you hosting this podcast right now. This is you speaking with authority, depth, and gravitas. And look at how relaxed and casual you are, right? This would be your version of authority, depth, and gravitas. This
Yeah.
is also my version of authority, depth, and gravitas. And I'm talking to you right now the same way I'd be talking to you if we were talking about our dogs or going on a hike or whatever. Like, I'm not putting on any airs. I'm really relaxed. I'm dropped in. There's nothing going on in my voice. So, which authentic version of you matches those specs is step one. Step two, we kind of just demonstrated it. Really read the script as if you're reading a screenplay, because everything is a film, including and especially all of the on camera italicized action, because so many clues are missed that are in there that are just killing voice actors. So if we leave in the on-camera talent's lines and then the voiceover is responding to that, you have to know that because it's going to really affect your
Yeah.
delivery of that line, right?
Yep.
We were casting for NHL once, and uh, one of the voiceover lines was a direct response to what the on-camera guy said, and 90% of the guys who were doing these crazy amazing reads otherwise totally missed the meaning of that line. And it was painful for me because I didn't want to put through anybody to the client who missed the meaning of that line, but then I
Mhm.
would have had no casting link. So I had to like put a disclaimer to the client saying like, hey, if you like any of these people and we need to get that line picked up in callbacks, we absolutely can. So really reading all the direction and what the voiceover lines are and asking yourself the very basic question that gets overlooked all the time, which is, what is the essence of the story? And I mean, dumb it down to the nucleus.
Right.
So you could paraphrase it. So it's just, and I don't mean like paraphrase it like, oh, the overarching concept is this. No, if it's like, if you have a home and you're not always home, you have an Airbnb it and get paid while you're away. That's the story. Like,
Yep.
hey, you own a house, you travel a lot. Why not make some extra cash? But make sure you get it down to that nucleus so that your message is going to be very clearly communicated. Step 3 is the tale as old as time, the good old who are you talking to, but it cannot be general because when we say who are you talking to, it's because we want to hear your relationship with that person because the way we relate to different people in our lives is what makes us unique from each other, right? So the way I talk to my daughter is totally different than the way
Sure.
you probably talk to your best friend. Both of those reads could be valid, but through that lens, we're going to hear, your the different nuances that make that relationship, distinctive and unique to you versus the way I do it, right? So, and if it's not somebody from your real life and you have to, let's say you are the director of a medical institution, that's who you are in the story, and you want to craft that you're talking to one of the doctors on your staff or one of the nurses. You can talk to somebody that you don't know in your real life, but make sure you craft them very specifically. What did they just say or do? What's happening with them? What did they come in to talk to you about? Like, it's got to be very uber specific so we hear your relationship with that person
Right.
come through. And then the fourth and arguably the most important step, and if people do this, it will put them in the top 1% of everything we listen to, is what did that person you're talking to say or do? Or if it's the kind of commercial where the voiceover is observing the on-camera action and responding, what did you just witness happen on camera? That absolutely forces you to respond with the first line of the script. So the first line of the script must be a genuine, connected, engaged response to something and not just like a shot out of a cannon, first line. And that's what I'm listening for in casting. I'm mining for the gold of engagement and interaction. I'm mining for like, does it feel like I am listening to a conversation already in progress? And if so, that's what pulls me into it. And then I listen to like, are you really understanding the story? Do I feel like you are embodying the version of you that the specs match? And then on and on and on from there.
So the first line is the hook, which is, I mean, that's universal, right? I mean,
Mhm.
whether you're making a TikTok video or a YouTube
Mhm.
video or, hosting a podcast or whatever, right? The first line, the first 3 seconds, first 6 seconds, that's the hook. If people are going to keep going.
Yep.
So you're saying that that's no different in commercial. You got to nail that first line.
Yes, but okay, so this is what sends so many actors down the wrong path. That's not like make a wacky choice that's
Right.
not supported by the story. Everybody always asks, like, what can we do to get noticed? I know those first 3 seconds are like crucial. And my answer is always, you don't do anything to get noticed because it's not about you. It's about serving the story.
Yeah.
So the first 3 seconds, how you're going to engage and pull me in is by really understanding who you are, what you're saying, to whom you're saying it, and why. And so, if you really just sink into that reality and engage in that truthfully, it's going to be an automatic, like, whoosh, like a moth to the flame. Because most of the time, I'm just getting like fired at. It's just like introducing, introducing, introducing. But the first person is like, huh, introducing, if that, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
who knows what
Yep.
the circumstance is.
Yep.
But there's something going on that I'm responding to instead of just kind of getting pummeled.
How many auditions are you listening to on average for a casting?
It's not a good answer. Um, on average, I would say 6 to 800 per gender.
6 to 800. How
So,
many of them are how many of them ballparking?
yeah,
How many of them as you go through are
or
you putting aside to the okay,
yeah.
this, yes.
So I find that I need about a 10% yield. So if we ultimately send about 60 per gender to the client, I need to listen to about 600.
Wow.
That's what I'm saying. Like, this is why I created the library because I want actors to have this information because so many people are just throwing spaghetti at the wall, right? They're just ripping and reading and like thinking that being conversational is good enough. But when we have clients get on and say, look at me, listen to me, like I need depth of
Good
connection.
enough is not good enough.
Right. Exactly. So it's about 10%.
Wow, that's crazy. That I mean, that obviously there's a lot of us that need to step up our game. That's I mean the one thing that I'm taking away from this. But you're also making it pretty clear how to do that. So
Yeah.
let's do the other side of the coin then, because we talked about what we're doing wrong, and
Mhm,
like grabbing random words and
mhm.
not actually putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. Let's talk about those one percenters.
Ah,
What are the one percenters doing differently? Is it the four
it's
steps that you just walked through? Is it like
I mean, I don't know if they know it or not. Like, I sort of came up with this through it's kind of like reverse engineering. It's like
sure.
listening for so long to what those one percenters are doing so well and then quantifying it, you know? So so they're doing all of that, whether consciously or unconsciously. But the other thing they're doing, and I cannot stress this enough, is that they're not making it about themselves. It's not about them. It's not about them getting noticed. It's not about, look how funny I am, look how smart I am, look how great I am at ad libbing. It's that they're putting all of their attention on the story and they're there to serve the story. So it's not about them. It's not, you have to remember that the creative directors who are hiring you all for these jobs are sitting most of the time listening to the voiceover auditions in their edit bay with their film on the big screen. And they're sitting there and they're just listening. And they're not listening as judges on America's Next Great Voiceover Talent Search competition, right? They're not going like, oh my gosh, that guy was hilarious. Like, even if their script isn't intended to be funny, right? Or like, wow, what a wacky choice. That perked my ears up. And then it would have no
Eh,
juxtaposition to drop into their film, right?
yeah.
They're listening to go, who understands this story? Who understands the tone, the pace, the cadence? Whose read could we drop into this right now and it would integrate and synthesize seamlessly, and that's how they're looking at it. So they're not looking to discover, the next great talent. They're trying to get their film made. So the actors who are doing really, really well are putting all of their attention on the story and taking all the attention off themselves.
Are the one percenters, is it the same one percenters consistently? Or
Mm-mm.
does it depend based on what you're like? There's one percenters. I don't know I'm trying to figure out how to word this right. There's one percenters when you're looking for this spec, and
Yes.
there's one percenters when you're looking for that spec. I think the point that I'm trying to get to is to hear that 10% only make it through, and 1% when we know the numbers is like next to nothing. For some voice actors, they're going to feel like I don't even have a shot
Oh, yeah.
realistically.
No.
But it's
Uh-uh.
not like it's just the exact same people over and
No.
over, because it always depends on what you're asking and what the client's looking for, correct?
Correct. 1,000% correct. Not that that's a real number, but um, it is. And the clients are always wanting new and fresh. And so what I would say is like in 2020 and 2021, there were a couple of voices who were just sweeping the floor. They were just cleaning up and they would book multiple of our projects. And since 2022 on, I would say, and I'm just throwing out hypothetical numbers as an example. Let's say hypothetically we cast 300 commercials in a year. I would dare say, and someday I'm going to have time to do the math on this and quantify it. I would dare say 280 would be booked by 280 different
Different.
actors. And
Wow.
then maybe there'd be 20 people total that would have booked two projects or three. Maybe somebody would have booked four. Very rarely would somebody book like more than five in a year. So that gives everybody hope because it's an even playing field
Yeah.
more than ever do clients want fresh, ownable, undiscovered talent because they don't want, like, oh, this person's voice is already synonymous with X, Y,
So,
and Z,
yeah. Yep.
right?
Yep.
And
Makes
so
sense.
that's why we always cast such a wide net. And the other thing that I really want actors to know is that every single solitary audition is a clean slate with me. Like I don't bring any preconceived ideas of who you are into like whatever casting I'm doing that day. So like let's say somebody in the past has been kind of stuck in that commercial trap and has been a little announcery and polished, and then all of a sudden they give a read that is just so grounded and dropped in and real. This just happened. And I'm like, okay, you got
You're
the
here
memo.
for it when that happens, right?
Yeah, I'm celebrating, like,
Yeah.
literally doing cartwheels in my living room going like, "Yes, Marc, sky
Finally figured it out.
yes," and this just happened recently, twice in a row. Like, 2 people that had kind of been on a more, typical commercial trajectory for a long time, all of a sudden, I just started hearing the connection and the responsiveness and the interactivity and all of that, and I put them through and they both booked. And, you know, I mean, who knows what happened in the session, how the spot came out, if
Sure.
they, had them ramp it up or not, but it just reinforced my every single project is a clean slate
Yeah.
mentality, because everybody is getting coaching and we're all evolving and we're all learning, and we're learning what works for one casting office is different from what works on the pay to plays. We at Sound and Fury are just one slice of the pie, and I totally honor and recognize that there are a million other pieces of the pie out there, and you guys all have to adjust.
It's good to know though, because I do think that there are probably some misconceptions around that because, if oh, your auditions traditionally are coming from agents, right? We're all
Mhm.
submitting for
Yes,
agents.
yes,
And for a lot of voice actors, I mean, maybe you book 1 or 2 with your agent in a year. I think that's pretty I would say that's probably more the norm than the voice actors who are booking 20, 30, 50, whatever with their agents, right? Like a lot of us are booking maybe a handful
yeah,
and feeling like what am I even doing because you're
mm,
submitting so many. But
yeah,
actually, if you're booking a couple of these, like
yeah.
you're doing all right.
Yeah, you're doing great. You're doing great. And even if you're getting, avails and callbacks through your agents, that's also such a good sign, because even then, that means you're down to the final 10, maybe,
Yeah.
or 5 of what could have been 1,000. I mean, that's just great feedback to
Yeah,
just,
the odds are good then. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. So let's talk about I think you kind of did, but how much does it matter to be known or does it matter? And when I say known, I don't specifically mean like, Matthew McConaughey,
yeah, no, I
known.
know.
I'm talking, there are voice actors that are like the A level of voice actors or whatever. Does that matter when you're going through? Are you looking at who's submitting or are you just every audition, like you said, it's a clean slate? I'm just listening to everything and looking for what fits. And it doesn't matter who is or isn't giving it to me.
It's that, and sometimes it can, like the one I just put a whole batch up for edits, right before we jumped on here. And there was somebody who books a ton, and I'm almost always put through. And I decided not to on this one just because I just didn't feel like the read was unique and distinctive enough for what we were specifically casting. And then there are people in there that are so unique and distinctive that I have never seen their names before. I have no idea who they are. So it really is project by project by project basis. Now, the one thing that I will say about being known in the sense of building relationships with people is that, like, I never really did the conventions until about, I think, 2 years ago, or the 2 or 3 years ago was the first time I ever went. And so many people that I've had deep conversations with, whether it's at Vocation or VO Atlanta, or I did the Euro retreat with JMC, those people who I, retreated with or like really connected with at the different conventions and stuff, because you build those one-on-one personal relationships, you start to hear them as a casting director. I start to hear their auditions through a different lens. I start to hear
Sure.
their auditions and I can hear the truth in it. I can hear their authenticity in it. And just getting to know them as people and going, oh, this is a solid person who I know I can trust in a session. That really does go a long way. Like, so while I would say 80% is just which reads are the best reads for the job, there's probably a 20% trust factor that goes into it. that I go, you know what, I'm going to put these people in because I know they can deliver in a session. I know that they're talented and they're versatile and they're good people and they're going to be reliable and show up. So that goes a long way. And so I really strongly encourage anybody to, like, go to these things if it's affordable, or like go to the online versions and try to carve out relationships with the people who are in the decision making positions in whatever genre you're interested in, because we're just people and we just want to get to know you on a human level. So the trap of that is you don't want to make it look like you're just networking, and you don't want to just make it all about you and your auditions and whatever. Like, really be interested in getting to know each other as people, as humans, and develop those relationships because they go a long way.
I've talked to a couple of different voice actors recently, both on the podcast and, seeing them at VO Atlanta or whatever, who I would consider to be, upper tier voice actors. And it's the one thing that I consistently hear across the board is that, when I see a workshop with a casting director, I go to it. When I see a workshop with a A-list agent, I go to it. When I see a workshop and whatever. And it's interesting though, because they're almost nervous to say it because they don't want people to think that,
Yeah.
buying favoritism or whatever, but you can't look at it that way. These are the people who are making decisions, and it is in our best interest to understand what they are looking for so that we can deliver it. That's just being smart. It's not about favoritism or
No.
being on a secret list or gatekeeping or whatever.
Mm-mm.
It's just being able to deliver the goods and understanding what the goods are that need to be
Yes.
delivered.
Exactly. You can't play unless you know what the playing field is. And so, everybody, every casting director, every agent, everybody's got a different playing field, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so just learning what that is, and then just really just getting to know each other as people. That's the key. There are some relationships that started for me at those conventions and stuff that are like have become like real true close friends. And that doesn't mean I put them through on everything, but that means when they're right, they're going to be at the top of my mind. And also, if I'm on the fence, I just know they're going to be able to deliver, so I'll take a risk, and sometimes it pays off. But like, if they were just a name on the list and I was on the fence, then that could be the deciding factor.
I think it's important to talk about that side of things though, because there's a narrative, and it didn't always used to be there, but I've definitely noticed it in the last couple of years. There's this narrative of this gatekeeping,
Yeah.
the joke of the VO Illuminati, although some people I don't think actually think it's a joke. I think that it's actually real. And so then they get it in their head that, like, it doesn't matter what I do, I'm gonna be, and I'm like, okay, well, if you come with that attitude, yeah, you are always gonna be on the outside looking in. But can you just clarify that it is in your best interest for all of us to succeed? Because the more
Oh,
voice actors who are out there doing really well, the better you look at
um,
your job, right?
and then I wouldn't have to listen to 1,000. Do you know what I mean? If
Yeah.
like, if the core, the people who are uh dedicated enough that they're listening to a podcast like yours and are going to conventions, they value their career enough that they're invested in doing all of those things. If those people all started to really dig deep and be authentic and do my job would be so easy.
Yeah.
But what I will say is, like, to the flip side of that, there is less than favoritism and nepotism at Sound and Fury. Like, it's really funny because my daughter is a voice actor, Carly's husband is a voice actor. Like, and my daughter will say all the time, if she's here and I'm casting, she's like, "You're gonna cut me, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, probably." She's like, "I can't believe you're gonna cut me." And I was like, "You should have worked a little harder on it." Or like, you know what I mean? Like, what, we will cut our own mothers if it's mucking up our casting. And we often do. And like, Carly has two little boys. And one time one of them came in and we had a kids casting. And I just heard in the background, he's like, "Are you gonna cut me, mama?" We're like, maybe. I don't know. So look,
Harsh,
there's
harsh.
no
It'll all
there
get sorted out in therapy one day. It'll be
yeah,
fine.
exactly, exactly. So there is no gatekeeping and there is no nepotism and there is no whatever. It is really truly the best read wins, and we champion creativity, and we champion connection, and we champion just like talent, just people who are doing the work.
Is it fair to say that the clients who
Mhm.
are the ones that are ultimately making the decision, they don't
Yes.
have a clue anyway, right? Like, they don't know who all the voice actors are by name. That doesn't matter to them. Like, they just wanna hear who's good and who fits and who matches and who syncs with the film or whatever. Like,
Yep.
they're not looking for names or whatever, and I'm just it's really good to hear you say that from that side, because I do think that there's some false narratives around some of that,
Yeah.
and if you actually stop and thought about those false narratives, if you thought about them rationally, you'd realize that they absolutely make
Yeah.
no sense. Like, it is not in the best interest to withhold people if just because you don't have a name, if you're what the
Oh,
client's looking for,
oh,
like that makes no
absolutely.
sense
Yeah.
actually.
And there's so many voice actors out there, and no matter how many conventions I go to and how often I meet people, like there are still hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of actors that I don't know personally. So for me to say oh, I'm not going to, put people through to the client if their reads are good and just because I don't know them, I would have no casting links. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? That would be
Yep.
crazy. And, that's the other thing is then the clients just get the same old tried and true over and which is what casting traditionally was, meaning the casting director would have to know who they wanted to bring in, or at least, know the agents that they trusted and just rely on those people. And that's why those casting links would be the same over and over and over again for these producers. And, when Sound and Fury's model came along, which was, sort of like we didn't have a booth. We weren't calling people in. We were relying on, you all to record at home and send it in. And then that became the norm once the pandemic hit.
Yep.
Um, it allowed us to have a much uh, wider scope and reach and hear these people from smaller markets that we would have otherwise no access to. And we started to see that those people from the smaller regional agents and people that we had kind of never heard of before, they weren't really on our radar, were booking these massive projects. And our clients were super happy with gosh, I had never heard of this person before, but they were fantastic. And we'd be like, yeah. So it would just kind of reinforce the model for us
So
to kind of
geography doesn't matter anymore.
not,
I mean, I'm sure there's the occasional one. I've seen the occasional one that's like, record in
LA.
LA or record in New
Yeah.
York or whatever. But by and large,
Yeah.
geography is irrelevant now.
As long as the sound quality is good and your source connect is rock solid, yeah, then no, it's, 99% of the time, that's the name of the game.
How many how many auditions are you seeing with bad audio?
Less and less,
Good.
but it took a while. I
Yeah.
mean, it took a while, but I feel like most people you know,
It's
have
a
really.
lesson that's finally been learned because it
Yeah, yeah. So
yeah.
so for the most part, yeah, I would say, 95% are good quality now, which is a godsend for me because it used to be that was really a difficult part of the casting. So let's say we were open to talent who have home studios and also talent who would be local hires that would have to go into a local studio. Then it's really hard because you're like, the read is good, but the sound quality is so bad. Can I trust that the client is going to be able to discern through the bad sound quality what I'm hearing
Right.
as the good read? And then it's like this whole mental puzzle that you have to kind of piece together. When everybody's sound quality is good and I can just focus on the connection of the read, it just makes my life so easy.
So we've established that this is so much about acting, that,
Yeah.
you know, connecting with the story, taking the time to actually read through the specs and not just read the words of the specs,
Mhm.
but actually discern what are these actually trying
Mm,
to say and
yeah. What version of me
yeah.
embodies these specs?
How much room, if any, is
Mhm.
there in the commercial space for taking liberties with is that your BC take?
No, it everything depends on the story. So if it is, let's divide all of commercials into 3 separate categories, right? Category 1 is anything that's serious and is you can tell that each line is gonna match up to picture.
Yep.
You don't wanna, ad lib, you don't really wanna go too far out of the story, how I would recommend you change your A to B take is just through intention. So, like, maybe the first time, like if it's for a hospital and you're the medical director, right? Maybe the first time you're talking to the parent of a
Right.
patient, and the second time you're talking to somebody on your staff. And so the first time you're kind of responding to a parent of a patient who's thanking you, and you're like, gosh, you don't have to thank me because the people we care for are at the center of everything we do here, right? And then the second time, you might be talking to one of the nurses that you saw have a less than pleasant interaction with a patient, and you want to course correct that. So you're bringing that nurse into your office and you're saying, listen, I'm really glad you're here. You're so efficient, but I want to get on the same page about something. The people we care for, they're at the center of everything we do. So those are two totally different intentions that are both completely supported by the story. Okay. So you never want to ad lib or take a big swing or a bold risk because it's really all about what is happening in that film. So then there are two more categories. So let's put all of comedy on the table and break it in half. There's the kind of comedy where you are observing what's happening on camera and responding. And in those cases, which there's a million of those, I feel like that's a huge trend of what we're casting these days. Because those are also driven by the film itself, you don't really want to take a big swing there either
Right.
because you are not responsible for the funny. The funny is happening for you on screen, and you are responsible for observing and responding, observing and responding. So it's kind of like Ron Howard's narration of Arrested Development, right? So he wasn't the comedy, he was the foil. He was the straight man to the comedy that was
Right.
happening, the insanity that was ensuing on camera, right? So in those types of, in that style of comedy, I wouldn't take a big swing or ad lib there. I would just kind of maybe change your, like if one is very understated and dry, then maybe the next one is sort of a little bit more interactive. But either way, you are just relying on what you're seeing and responding to it. So then there's the third category. And usually in that third category, we will explicitly say, like, hey, we're looking for comedic actors and improv artists to just put their own spin on it and to bring their unique perspective and point of view to it. That's when you really have license. And usually those scripts are when there isn't really a film playing out per se, but let's say like we just cast Whataburger and
Okay.
the what was being shown on camera was just a picture of the burger and then a user comment popped in. And the comedy was coming from the voiceover's interaction with that user comment, right? Because the voiceover was supposed to be like the social media manager
Okay.
and the way that voiceover interacts with the user comment. So it's not like there's this big film playing out on screen. It's really the comedy is ensuing because of the voiceover, right? So the voiceover in that case is responsible for the comedic effect. So those are the opportunities where you can make a bold choice, take a big swing. Once in a blue moon, we do cast these really fun characters. Like we cast a disgruntled bear for something and a really
Yeah.
unhinged psychotic cat. Those are your opportunities to like really play and embody the character fully and take some risks and let your freak flag fly. But anything that is married to picture, the picture is king and you are just there to serve.
Maybe we maybe already covered this a little bit, but what is trending for 2025 as far as specs? What are you seeing, or what do you think is coming? Is it changing? Is, what was booking last year booking this year, or were the voice actors who were making bank last year, are they going to have to be prepared to do something different to do it again, to make bank all over again in 2025?
So I will say, like, I really, really shy away from speaking in generalities because I really believe, at least for the stuff that we cast, that every single solitary creative that comes our way is like a snowflake and it's its own unique thing and requires its own unique spec, right?
Okay.
But I will say the trends that we're mostly seeing right now are that observe and respond. So it's very subtle, very understated, but that doesn't mean do nothing. That means like allow the film to be telling the story and you have a point of view, but
Yep.
it is right sized for film. It is subtle and responsive. That's a big trend. But like in terms of like the specs, like I know there are a lot of people out there saying like, yeah, I'm seeing a lot more authoritative. I'm seeing a lot more ownership. We've been casting that for many, many years now, like that dropped in, grounded, like ownership. Um, there's always been for the last several years a trend away from, anything charactery,
Yep.
anything, like performative, hammy, all of that stuff is all kind of like gone by the wayside, and all the stylized reads have left the building. So we'll get on these creative calls, and the first, even if it's for like a bank like JP Morgan Chase, they'll be like, please don't give us any bank voices. Like literally, they'll like have their hands like this, like, please don't. Everything is true peer-to-peer sharing. So even if it is for JP Morgan, I'm your friend Tina that just happens to work for JP Morgan talking to my friend Marc about, hey, like, do you need funding for your business? Like, how can I get in there and help? And talking to you the way I'm talking to you right now about voiceover, same version of me, just talking about banking instead of talking about voiceover. So everything is just real friend to friend.
I feel like there is a social media reality show opportunity here for you to
Mhm.
record some of these interactions with some of these clients so that
Right.
voice actors can sit and watch them so
Yeah.
that we can see actually I think it might be incredibly insightful for us to see
Yeah.
on your side, look, like this is what the clients are asking. This is how the conversation went down. This is what they're saying. This is what they're begging or pleading for or whatever. I think it might be incredibly insightful for us to
Yeah.
see some of that because some of those conversations sound like they're I don't know, is it an intense thing or is it like a, oh for the love of God, please, not
It
again.
depends on the client, but I swear, like, until that show comes out, what you have are the specs, because I
Yep.
literally get off those calls and immediately translate it all to this into the specs. So if I underline stuff, and what I've been doing more and more and more lately is I'll write a blurb before the specs, which will say campaign background, and that's literally me, Tina, saying to you all actors, "Hey, everybody, here's the story.
Yeah.
Here's the story." I'm like trying to like
Pay
hand it to
attention to
everybody on
this.
a
I'm
stick.
literally giving you the
I'm
keys to the
giving you
kingdom.
exactly. And the specs are really like every detail and nuance I could squeeze out of them and then translate it as best I can into actor speak. So like sometimes I'm now even saying like it's as if your intention is this, or perhaps you observe this and you're amused, or perhaps you observe this and you think it's stupid, or perhaps, but I'm like trying to trigger intention. I'm trying to trigger connection to the story, and I'm trying to trigger true interactivity through the way we write the specs.
So on an average audition, when you've given us all of that
Mhm.
and you're still only getting a handful that are actually good, how is it that you're not a raging alcoholic or
No,
how
I'm
many
a
times a day do you wanna just reach through the screen and just be like, grab us by the throat and
I know. No, you know what? It's actually like, and, I know it's 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but it usually is pretty plentiful. Like, I usually do have a fairly I mean, I won't say I always have an embarrassment of riches, but I will say that it's almost always like I'm always very confident that we can get a really excellent link to the clients. It's very rare that I'm like, are we gonna make it,
Right.
And how am I not a raging lunatic? I mean, it's all debatable. It depends on who you ask. I had therapy, this afternoon, and I chatted to the team, and I was like, okay, I'll be back in an hour, hopefully 2% less crazy.
There's
So,
gotta be days when it's gotta just drive you crazy, and it really just feels like, listening to you for the last hour, it's like, if we would just slow down,
mhm,
take a beat,
yep,
actually read the specs, don't
yeah,
just look for the one word that you can
mm,
identify with, but
yeah,
actually figure out what the story is. Like,
mhm,
I'm not an actor. I admit that I'm not an actor. It's always been a struggle, but
mhm,
that side of it's always been a struggle. But if you actually just stop
yeah.
and give yourself a minute to sit down, like it's not rocket science what you're asking for here, right?
And it's not Shakespeare.
Yeah.
It's not, you don't have to be, you don't have to have your master's in acting.
Yep.
It's because everything is you,
Yep.
right? So it's like, hey, what would somebody have needed to say to me to get me to say this first line. It's really as simple as that, right? It's like, it's and that's really where it all starts, is like, okay, look at that first line. What has to have just happened for me to respond with this? It's just that easy. So
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be this like big exercise in sense memory and substitution and all of that stuff. Although if you're a great actor and that comes easily to you, bring it to the table. But it can really be as simple as, it's just cause and effect.
Yep.
Cause and effect. It's stimulus response, stimulus response.
Tell us about the library, because I feel like a lot of the secrets are in the library. I
Yes.
don't think like I don't know that I've ever experienced a course or a coach or something in this industry that is so widely and highly regarded. And
Oh,
I mean, and I say that in all seriousness, like across the board, this is like the holy grail.
oh.
So tell us about the library.
It makes me so, I'm, like, actually tearing up. It makes me so happy because it has truly been a labor of love, and I know people probably like roll their eyes, whatever, but it's, I have this weird little pocket of information, and I really want to share it with people to be of service and to try to add value to everybody's life and to simplify your experience in the booth. And so I really feel passionate about sharing it with everyone, and I have such limited coaching availability that this is my way of getting all of the, getting the answer code out to
Yep.
everyone.
Yep.
So the library is, it's right now it's up to, I think it's like 4 hours of literally everything I've ever known about voiceover from doing it for the last 30 plus years. Um broken into bite-sized videos on different topics. So there'll be a topic of like how to create a pre-life that really works, that is justified by the story, how to find the story even in the most like commercial script, how much ad-libbing is too much, how to differentiate your takes. Like I do one video where it's like I crowdsourced every question that any voice actor could ever want to ask a casting director. And it's called like VO Magic 8 Ball. And it's like I'm shaking the magic 8 ball and answering the question. So,
Love it.
um, and I update it I update it pretty frequently. Whenever I start coming across something that I haven't already covered, I will be, I keep like a notepad and then I do update videos. And so it's a one-time purchase. Um, you never pay again, and all the updates are free, and everything is time coded. So let's just say hypothetically you don't have time to like go back and rewatch because you're looking for one thing. If it's an audition where you have to break the fourth wall, you can literally just type in fourth wall. It tells you what video, what time code, and you can just watch
Nice.
that minute or 30 seconds and then go into your audition. So it was a way for me to be in the booth with you at all times. And the other benefit, which has been really extraordinary for me, is that now I host these bi-monthly library study groups. Now, those are paid sessions because it's like a deep work
Sure.
session.
Yep.
Um, and I limit it to 10 players and then an unlimited amount of auditors for a much lesser price. And we go really, really deep and we practice the skills that are all outlined in the library. So, like, there'll be a night where it's just all about getting to the nucleus of the story. There'll be a night where it's all about ad-libbing. There'll be a night where it's all about, whatever subject matter that we're going to be covering that's based in the library. And those workshops have been off the charts because everybody's operating under the same, foundation and
Yep.
technique. So there's not a lot of teaching. It's like, okay, so the lesson that we have to apply to this is, you know, like
Yep.
the, like match my tone lesson, whatever it is. And so that it's been so rewarding, and it's just been amazing because people will write to me like, I booked like 2 jobs like the day after we did one of those workshops, or, I used this technique and it, really worked in the session. It's been really, really just so good for my heart.
It's awesome.
So that's the library.
So where do we find it?
It's on my website, which is tinamorascocoaching.com. And then there's a tab for the library. And it's also translated in Spanish. So any Spanish speaking talent can get the biblioteca, which is, it's all the same videos, but just with Spanish subtitles.
Right on. Okay. I'll make sure to include that in the show notes. Well,
Thank
Tina, this
you.
has been This has been really insightful. I think it's really cool to see the other side and understand, bust a few myths, but also really get into the nitty-gritty of, here's some actionable steps that we as voice actors can be taking to just submit better auditions, knowing that the people on the other side of those auditions are just rooting for us to
Oh,
succeed.
like, I can't even tell you, like, I
Yeah.
backflips, like, speaking out loud even when I'm home by myself, I'll be like, "Yes, Mark Scott, you got it. Yes, yes." You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
just so much celebration on this end. We are rooting for you. We love you. We couldn't do our jobs without you, and every time you unlock something new, we hear it, we notice. I always say, like, we're like one-way stalkers, like, I know like all of you and you have no idea, but like I'm the ether. So you send it off to the ether and I'm like, "Hi, I'm the ether. It's me."
Well, that's awesome. And I know this is going to help a lot of people. And I know there's going to be a few that are going to check out the library, and that's gonna absolutely help them too. So Tina, thank you so much for
Oh,
your time and the wisdom that you've shared with us. I'm really, really grateful for that, for taking time out, because I know obviously it's been a very busy April. So
yeah.
I'll let you go so you can keep doing what you do so that we can keep doing what we do.
Yes, absolutely. And thanks for having me on, and thanks for the service you're providing to the voiceover community. I mean, like, getting the right information to as many people as possible is just, it's such a noble, worthy goal, and I really appreciate you for everything you do. And your 12 days of Christmas, or is it 20 days?
So it feels like it by the time we're done giving away all the prizes, but yeah, we have some fun with that. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's just, I just love it, and I'm just so grateful that you asked me to be involved in it this year, and you've got me for the duration of Christmases to come, for
Yeah,
all of Christmas future.
I love it. I will make a note of that.
Yes.
All right, Tina, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.